What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Salty Runback, here to be your weekly intake of North American Developmental League of Legends. We are at a pivotal point in the developmental season. We just wrapped up another week of the NACL with week 3 officially in the books, getting closer to that halfway point in the regular season. And maybe even more importantly, we wrapped up our regional conference playoffs for the College League of Legends. The national championship bracket begins this Saturday, with the bracket officially being unveiled, I think, tonight, as you are seeing this episode be released. Got a lot of fun stuff to talk about across both spaces. My name is Grapes, joined alongside Hawk. Hawk, how are you doing today?
Grapes, I'm doing okay. It's my recovery day, my work hangover day. I'm feeling a little sleepy still. Less so than I was when you randomly called me like 5 minutes before I left for work yesterday on Battle of the Bubble, which was great. I'm really glad I could show face. Everybody say thank you, Grapes, for putting on not one but 2 CLOL shows this past weekend. I'm going to be honest, I did, and this is probably me being generous here, I did like 20% of the work. So much of the heavy lifting was all on Grapes' shoulders. He absolutely championed these two ideas. We kind of came with them together and formulated a lot of like what we wanted to do. But in terms of actual execution, it was all this guy. So do not give me any credit. Give it all to Grapes. If you enjoyed what you saw, make sure you let him know.
Oh, I appreciate that. The Battle of the Bubble, it was originally supposed to be a 2-week affair, and how it was going to work was you took the first week, and I took the second week because we were more free on those available weekends. But
this is
just
true.
The way it ended up working out. I had a bit of a busy last couple of days. I'm coming to you from having done a 26 straight hours of being awake session, because I woke up at noon-ish on Sunday for the Battle on the Bubble. I did some stuff, did the tournament until 10. I had to then fill in my selection ballot until 11, and then a normal responsible person would go to bed after that, but I ended up staying up and trying to just get some other stuff done leading into LPL, which ended up being a 6-game day starting at 5 in the morning up until 11 to 12 p.m. That day. Shout out to Fun Plus Phoenix, by the way, for taking another upset over JDG. That was a crazy series, even though I was only half awake for some of it. So it's gonna be a busy week, but we're gonna be happy about it, because that means that there's a lot of fun League of Legends to cover here. Speaking of, if you want all updates about everything, you can follow us on all of our socials at Salty Runback NA. Our Patreon account will have another episode of Office Hours before the bracket ends up beginning, and will be filled with constant updates throughout the tournament as well. Gonna try to get some semi-pro POV in there as well. I think maybe a shooting the salt in the works for this week, depending on how free we are. We'll see.
Yeah, either maybe this week or next week, whichever one makes the most sense. Yeah, so fun fact for all the fans at home, I started a new job recently, and I finally got my consistent schedule, which is going to be Thursdays through Sundays. So a little bit difficult for the whole esports thing. Obviously going to be able to balance things moving forward, but it was sort of these last couple weeks as I just started where it's a little bit difficult to immediately deprioritize the new job you have, because I work at a bar from so my shifts are usually 5 to 2, so it's just a little tough. But we're figuring things out. Definitely be sure to like, comment, subscribe on this video. Definitely check us out everywhere at Salty Runback NA, and also join our Discord where we just hosted the Battle of the Bubble. That was probably the #1 way to be able to keep up, as well as with CLOL season starting this weekend, y'all, this is going to be the place to be.
One of the most exciting parts of the entire year for me every
favorite. It's our favorite.
Is this first week of CLOL, and so make sure to stay tuned for our part 2 in a couple of days, where we're gonna go through the full bracket. But for now, let's give some love to the NACL as we will kick off our headlines. Let's start off with actually something that took place a few days after we first started. We did our recording and last week. So
I think it took place the day of our recording.
Yeah, it always happens this way. But DarkZero, the consensus #1 team in the NACL, who, by the way, just took another win in their regular season as well against CCG, also announced that they would be picking up 5 more players to their roster and run a 10-man roster for the remainder of the 2025 Split 1 of NACL. 5 players: Tenacity, Kryra, Toasty, Spawn, and Cryogen. will be competing with DarkZero Dragonsteel Light, where you'll have DarkZero Dragonsteel Storm being the main official team. If those 5 players sound familiar to you, it's because they were part of a specific organization for a little bit in the offseason before something unfortunately ended up happening to them. They said the goal was to allow for them to both get stage time throughout the regular season as well as inter-scrim time with the main roster. I guess overall, Hawk, now this move has been done, we were hoping that these guys found a home after what happened to them in the offseason. But now that they are signed to DarkZero, what's the best way for them to be utilized in a 10-man system?
See, it's actually really interesting because I don't know what the best way to utilize them is, but I really am in favor of this move nonetheless because it just feels like it has a really good purpose to it of like, to me, one is just like PR slam dunk. This was Clerky and the folks over at DarkZero being like, look, guys, let's just get this roster like OP scrim partners, and we can look good for doing it. But also, I do think there's a really real intention behind it, and I know the 10-man roster has been floated. Like, I do think legitimately, and the reason why I like it, and the reason why I've loved so much of what Dan has been doing recently, is it feels like it comes from a very genuine place of like, I'm just trying to do right by like talent in North America, right? And it's like, I think this is coming from a place of like, I just want to help these 5 guys and like develop them and do something good. But in my opinion, the selfish angle here is actually what everyone's been talking about, which is the rumors that this DarkZero roster might not survive the year. And not because they're going to boom, but because the LTA is circling and struggling teams are very interested in particularly UG and Toasty, as well as a lot of people talking about Zamudo right now as well. So, that is, in my opinion, actually the reason why Clerky decided to make this move is because I wonder if in Split 3 we potentially, for the first time in Maryville like semi-pro history, they've played in Tier 3, Tier 2 for many years, as well as Collegiate. I wonder if they're going to field a roster of not entirely students in the summer split for the first time. And that's, if I had to guess, probably because it comes in a weird time frame given their recruitment window, and also gives the DarkZero brand the best possible chance to field the strongest roster available at all times throughout the season in order to achieve their goals of promoting the LTA. So it's a win-win-win for everybody involved. The players, the university, and the brand. Which, that's what I think the angle is. And I could be wrong, but it seems very intelligent to me.
Yeah, I'm not saying that what's it called? I'm not saying that Clerky is not somebody who wants to do right by everybody, but there's clearly a benefit for DarkZero Dragonsteel to be picking up these 5 players, right? First of all, hilarious. I tweeted this out, but hilarious that an NACL team now has an academy team before any of the LTA teams do after all that, because there still is benefit.
That's
Shocker.
Also pretty funny. Yep.
There still is a benefit to fielding multiple people on your roster and having
that's pretty real.
A developmental program within your ecosystem. But I totally agree with you in that in a world where you could potentially be losing some players, you don't want to be left scrambling. You don't want to have to be like forced to play with subs, especially because for a team like Maryville, if it was just Maryville University, maybe their priority would be to get their students involved. Maybe you would call up Shimmer or the like. But now there's a different incentive in that you have a partnership with a professional esports organization, DarkZero, and you have to make sure you do right, not by just yourself, but also to them in order to get them the best. You need to protect
DarkZero's investment and ambitions.
Yeah, and you have to get them the best possible roster to promote into the LTA, which is their inherent goal and their eventual goal. And so getting these guys spots is going to be very cool to watch. I am interested to see if Kryra and Cryojin specifically could potentially, like, they're around college age, if they decide that they maybe want to go over to Maryville for next semester.
Yep.
I know Zyko is kind of, I think he's graduating, or he already graduated but was staying another year for a master's or something like that. So that is a potential angle for them if they want to go that way, because they made it known in the announcement that of the initial partnership that the goal was that if DarkZero promoted into the LTA, Maryville kind of becomes their quote unquote academy program where they recruit students and then kind of serve as a pipeline through. And so I'm excited for this, and I think the best way, going back to the question, best way to utilize the iteration of this situation is obviously they should be screaming against each other all the time. I would love for there to be kind of some active competition, maybe especially towards the end of the season, or maybe even going into split three, between splits 2 and 3 maybe, between the two rosters itself. Like if Toasty
There's got to be a
deserves that
show
mid lane
match.
spot, maybe
There's
in the
got
summer
to be
he
a
gets
show
in there.
match.
But also, in terms of doing right by the players, it's very funny to me because DarkZero is really playing into the whole spring split doesn't matter thing because they said they were going to maybe give some of these guys some stage time as well. And so they did say that it would be only as like the 5-man units each way. So it either will be all 5 of the
Which is
DarkZero
good.
Dragonsteel Storm or the DarkZero Dragonsteel Light. But maybe between splits there could be a little shuffling here or there.
No, and I think it's good that they're not going like true 10-man roster, right? Because like you don't want to fuck with like the good things that both these teams have going because everyone does ultimately understand that their intentions are still like slightly independent of each other. I am really curious to see what stage time looks like because I do know that they did say that DarkZero Light would get some stage time. Like, are they just going to get the series against, well, they can't play Pulse. Are they going to get the series against AMI? You know what I mean? Or like surely they don't get the series against Winthrop because that's grudge match. Or maybe they do because MU's already clapped their cheeks enough times. Like I kind of wonder like what that part of things looks like. But if I am being completely honest, I feel like even if DarkZero Light only gets like one best of 3 on stage, I still think this is probably a better move for them than if they hadn't gone at all. Because I don't think like playing ACL just to like play in a grand finals against the Citadel is that valuable for them because they'd still be independent.
I was about to actually ask you that question though. Are you a little disappointed that they're not going to that this roster of 5 is now tied directly to Dragonsteel, likely will end up integrating within them instead of becoming their own NACL team, going through the OQs, probably winning through that promotion tournament and being a part of Split 2 with a different organization?
Well, so I think now maybe I'm missing some of the minutiae of the announcement. I would be actually. Do we know that like DarkZero Light's going to be like this for the whole year, or is it just a this split thing?
Well,
Because
my assumption is that if any of these roster changes like do happen, right? Like if UG gets called up somewhere to LTA, that would screw up a lot of the core of that roster probably won't be able to compete in the OQs, and they're all I think there is a rule also that
we'll see because the way I interpret it is once off season starts in between splits 2 and 3, right? We have the mid split off season. If DarkZero does not lose players, then they're probably gonna be like, "Thank you so much, DarkZero Light. Now, best of luck. Go play in the OQs," which I think is like the everybody win scenario there. Which
But isn't the
I
OQ
fully
gonna
believe will happen.
happen
And then
during
if
the
people
season?
on MU get picked up by LTA or leave otherwise, it to me seems like DarkZero Light will probably still have full autonomy over what they want to do, but DarkZero will kind of get like the first dibs towards them in like free agency, if you will, where it's like, hey, Kryra, if you want to come play for DarkZero Storm and for Split 3, the spot is here for you. And then I would imagine that decision will be left to Kryra or whoever that is given to. So I am actually. I think it's not that much of a bummer that they don't get to play in this ACL. I think this is definitely better for the Toasty Kryra team. And then whether or not they play in tier 3 seems to me like it'll be completely their decision. I could be off base.
It's my assumption that the OQ is going to be happening during the Split 1 playoffs because that's what it's always been like. And the promotion tournament happens like right after the playoffs or right before the playoffs, right? And so you're not going to have time to do like a 3-week OQ into the promotion tournament before Split 2 starts again and having MSI in the way and all that. So,
but you also have to remember these players will also be available in the offseason proper, and this is assuming that no one would just try to pick them up anyway.
Like as a 5-man unit.
As like either a 5 or just like like, hey, Kryra, here's a spot on DarkZero. Boom. Tenacity, here's a spot on
Right, but that's disappointing. That to me is a little disappointing that they're not going to be able to go through the OQ and play it. Because to me, we're never gonna see this roster of 5 probably play together because of
Sure.
like other than the
I
two
think
stage games in the NACL.
I think for
And that and
me
we were so
the most
excited about this
important
roster going
thing.
into the year.
I think to me, I agree with you. I just think for me the most important thing is that the players end up somewhere where they can be successful, whether it's together or separate. And so I think as long as that is able to happen, I'm okay with it. But I do see where you're coming from. It would be cool to see this 5-man play.
Yeah, it would have been is my take, and I think that
That's
that's
fair.
probably not going to happen now that the OQ
That is fair.
they're not going to play through the OQ is my read of things given this announcement. So that's
No,
why I
that's a
potentially had
valid
a
that's
little
a
bit of a
valid
different
take.
take.
I got you. I got you.
But it is cool. Again, biggest thing for the players is that they have they have the most success, and they think that this is the best case situation for them, and clearly they do. So, best of luck to them
This was a
moving
good discussion,
into
I think.
the rest of Split One. Yeah, a little more nuanced than I maybe initially thought it was going to be coming in, which is good. But let's move on to our next headline as we continue to talk about the ACL the NACL and some of the results that happened last week. One of the biggest games that ended up happening was actually the first matchup of the entire week, which was Luminosity Gaming dropping a game to Blue Otter, who had, I think, a bit of a slower start to the season than we might have originally expected. But now Blue Otter, currently in the standings, sitting in 7th place at 1-2, and play against CCG, a team with the exact same record as them, who also took a game against Near Airport, another team that is considered to be towards the top of the standings. Out of these two teams, and we'll talk about the matchup afterwards, but which of these rosters in Blue Otter or CCG do you believe in more in terms of breaking into that top 4, top 3 pack?
So I think right now I'm unlike the last one, which ended up being a very nuanced discussion. I think CCG to me is the only team that looks like they have the potential to become a clear 4th place because they are what 3-4 in game score so far, with 2 of their series being against the top 3 so far, right? And they had a very dominant win over an admittedly trash-looking Supernova. So we've not seen a lot of tape from them, but what we have seen has been very solid. And if I'm being honest, even with their win over Luminosity, I'm still not really looking at Blue Otter as like a major contender because they got blasted in the other 2 games, and then they beat Pulse, right? It's like, okay. So I feel like CCG is the only team that's looked like they could maybe become a consensus 4th place. Blue Otter probably not, and then every other team just looks like they're very much a part of the soup that we expected to form, right? Like Conviction got destroyed by DarkZero. Okay, back to Earth, right? They're probably gonna lose again this week. Who are they playing? They're playing like Luminosity or something.
Conviction is playing DarkZero this week. They lost to Near Airport last week.
Or thank you. So like they're kind of back to Earth. Supernova doesn't look good. Winthrop doesn't look good. There's a team I'm forgetting, I feel like, but you get my point. CCG feels like right now the only team that's in a position to like maybe become like the 4th place team.
And would you say that just because of the players on their roster and how they're playing? Because Conviction currently right now has a better game record, right? And so in terms of, and Winthrop has a better game record. AMI right now has a better game record. So
Yeah.
you using the game record is not, I think, indicative of that. It's more you're saying.
Well, but even then, records are super relative in NACL though, because everyone's played a different number of games against different people. Like I said, CCG yes has the worst record, but they played 2 teams in the top 3 as opposed to only 1 or none, like all those other teams that were listed. And their tape is decent. Look, they got destroyed by DarkZero. It was like horrific. They lost in like 40 minutes. It was bad. Kind of set that one aside though. Like they looked really, really, really good against Supernova, and I think against Near Airport, it was a very competitive series. And to me, CCG just like has pretty good tape so far. I think they've looked like a pretty solid team, whereas I think Conviction very prone to like sort of like rookie mistakes, if you will. Also, I do think Conviction is maybe they could be in that 4th place conversation. They've looked okay, but then everybody else, like I'm purely just talking about how they've looked on tape. I'm not necessarily feeling like they are better than any of the other teams they've played against.
I still think of how Blue Otter looked at the end of last year, and not just the placement that they ended up finishing or their like game score results, but the way that they were playing as well was very, very fun and very, I think, conducive to success in this league specifically. They still have to play near Airport and DarkZero, which I think is what you were going for, obviously, and what your point was. But if they win this game over CCG, then I think we have to suddenly start thinking about
Oh, I
them
agree. I mean,
a little
look,
bit more.
I think the take for me is if Blue Water beats CCG, it's just a soup like we all expected. You know what I mean? But anyway, sorry.
It's interesting to see you think CCG is like definitely has the opportunity to be better than like a Conviction, for instance, who did get off to a pretty hot start overall. But I to me right now it is still all the soup. I think more likely to jump into that top pack between these two teams specifically. I might lean Blue Otter a little bit. Just because of
Okay.
the how good they can look in team play specifically, and I feel like some of that
I don't
individual
know,
play.
man. The way they play around objectives was making me sad against
I
Luminosity and
just
Pulse.
yeah, no, I'm just thinking about that one game that they had against Luminosity. That was awesome, but
It was fun. It was fun.
okay.
No, that's
That's the
fair.
closest game. That's the closest game of the rest of the week. I will say also
Yeah.
though, speaking of game score, CCG are the team that are one of the teams that plays 2 games this week. So if they both beat Blue Water and then also beat Winthrop, that will put them right back into the
Yeah.
top of the table as well.
Hey, I can just take the I'm objectively correct route where if they win both their matches this week, they're then 3-0 against the rest of the soup and probably locked into playoffs, to be completely honest. So like easy top 4 angle right there. Whereas Blue Water only has the one match. Conviction also only has one match against DarkZero, so like they're probably fucked. But
Yeah. Hey,
I mean,
I know.
you're probably right. It probably just still is a soup. I feel like right now CCG might have an opportunity to like step out of line, you know?
This is the week to do it. This is like their stepping stone week if they want to try to jump into that pack. So I understand I understand your point there. And we'll see how it goes as we have 3 days of the NACL, obviously. But I think the thing I'm thinking about more
It's not the main event.
is CLOL here. Let's get into our next headline. We hosted a tournament. We weren't actually able to announce it by the time our last episode came out, but it ended up happening. The Salty Runback CLOL battle on the bubble, which featured 6 different teams from different walks of the CLOL space, from partner conferences, from regional conferences, all with the proposed opportunity to promote up and increase their stock before the national championships, whether it was to just get a higher seed or to potentially get a spot in with 2 of the teams that took part, Texas and Northeastern, being not locked in via an auto bid at that point. Overall, we had a lot of games take place. Congratulations to San Jose State and USF, who had the best overall game records on the day. I guess in terms of winners, you could give it to San Jose State because they won all of their quote-unquote matches, and their only game loss was a in-game loss in the best of 3. But winners and losers aside, what was your biggest takeaway from how this event ended up formulating and how it ended up shaking out?
I gotta say, I was really pleased. I feel like this went better than I hoped almost because like it was really competitive. Every team won at least 2 games out of the 6 that basically everybody played, 5 or 6. Which is real, like that's impressive. And I think it goes into my takeaway here, which is going to be I think that the field in CLOL this year, the 32 or let's say 35 teams that are kind of in the conversation for the national championship this year, as we await the bracket announcement, is more competitive than it ever has been. Where we are having conversations about like teams that, we want to vote in and like, damn, we're just going to vote them in as an 8 seed. And like, that was teams that we saw yesterday playing in Battle of the Bubble, all taking games off of one another. I think like we are the closest that CLO's ever been to the national championship actually being like the true top 32 teams in the nation. It's still not quite perfect, but like it feels like it's getting to that point, and I think that's extremely cool.
I feel like that's more circumstance than like the way the format has changed though, because
Oh, I
the only
agree.
reason we're
Yeah.
thinking that is because there happen to be, in our opinion, some better partner conference champions that are coming out of the end of things. Like for example, there's no Iona from the MAC because the MAC has kind of ceased to exist. Wake Tech is no longer the NJCAE representative. That's now represented by Nova, who actually is a full GM to Challenger level roster. So in terms of the field being stronger, though, I definitely agree. Again, those two teams specifically, just naming them out as being players, as being teams that were part of the CLOL soup last year towards the bottom. Campbellsville, Aquinas College. Obviously, we have our Rochester Christians and things like that, but watching a
I
team
think
like
RCU's the only one though. Like even Purdue, dude, Purdue got hands,
no,
bro. They beat,
watching Purdue in that
yeah,
event was super impressive. Even at Northeastern, who is still on the outside looking in as being the 2 seed from the ESC, they played some competitive games. To me, that raises like Ball State stock in terms of how good I
yeah.
think they actually are going to be going into the year. And in terms of the other results from the rest of the weekend, like the biggest winner to me was San Jose State. They had zero tape against good opponents. They played the last time we saw them, other than like in actual CLOL Top 32 or the Mountain West Conference, was like the CLOL Fall warm up of 2024, where they did win a series over some team that I already kind of forgot who they were. So for them, going into this event, I was like, I would love to rate this team like a little bit higher than I have them right now. I like Evan Lai. I like Went Rumble. I think they are both really good players. It's a full, highly ranked roster. And so seeing them take a game off of Cal, who's a ranked team, take a game off of USF, who is a ranked team, and then, win the rest of their games as well. That to me raised their stock a lot and actually like kind of put them like into a conversation where if we did a top 25 poll this week, like they wouldn't be just 25, they'd be higher than that.
No, I completely agree. Yeah. SJSU, man, they went from having 0 quad 1 games in their entire season to now being 3-0 against Q1. And I mean, yeah, they were all best of
Q1,
ones,
yeah.
but still, like, it's just, yeah, it's like, that's fucking dank. Dude, I don't know who SJSU Stinky is, but he's not Went Rumble and
Stinky
not
Joker,
Evan
what
Lyon.
a beast. Oh my
This
god.
guy was
yeah.
going nuts, man. Also, Evan Lyon, the Yomu's Urgot Jungle, I think he went back to back on that pick. Like,
He
won
played it 4
2
times
games.
out of the 6 games that they played this week. Yeah.
How many times?
I think it was like 4 times he played
4.
Urgot
Well,
Jungle.
yeah, and I saw at least 2 of them. Like, this man was going brazy with it, including against our goat Jonathan's on South Florida there. Shout out to South Florida for coming to play, by the way. Like, they had literally nothing to gain, but we kind of needed a team because we asked, like, literally every other bubble team and they couldn't show. And South Florida, decided, hey, we're going to play last second. Did drop a game to SJSU. I don't think it'll affect their stock in any way, to be completely honest. I think, if anything, it just made SJSU look good, which is, like,
100%.
good guys
Yeah.
for that. And I do think South
Take one
Florida,
for the
like, kind of
team.
provided, like, a nice level playing field for us to create some expectations for, as well as UC Berkeley, who I also think came in and looked like about as we expected them to. And I say that like in a positive connotation, where it's like UC Berkeley came in and they like won the games they were supposed to. They dropped a couple of games, and that's totally fine,
They also were playing with the sub support for
They
the
were
entire
playing with sub
tournament.
support, yeah.
And one of them being a top lane main towards the back half. They had their sub top laner come in and play like the best of 3 against USF. So
Yeah.
I'm not taking too
That
much
was
of
the
that
secret
into stock.
support, by the way, I was talking about
Yeah,
on our
last week.
episode last week when we were talking about ACL.
The other big takeaway that I had from the Battle of the Bubble, we'll move on to the top teams in a bit, but I think it's a good time to talk about the at-large selections, because there were 8 that we had to come and put through. In our episodes of CLOL Office Hours that have come out, if you're a patron, or just like some of the videos I've been putting out on Twitter, to me, nobody in that bottom 4, in terms of the vote-ins, really earned it. Other than NECC 234 and Purdue Northwest, who ended up being second from the MEC. Like the other 4 spots, it felt like nobody really earned that ticket in based off of like their good play. And unfortunately to me, this tournament did not really give us that as well. The 2 teams that we brought in, Northeastern and Texas, that we were hoping to see like put up performances that could potentially play themselves into a spot, didn't necessarily go the way that they were expecting. UT Austin, they lost 3 games in the best of 1 stage, whereas Northeastern beat Purdue and then lost to Cal and San Jose State, who I will say were 2 of the better teams in the event. But then it came down to a best of 3 between the two teams in our crossover series, and Texas won in a very sloppy 2-1. That just felt to me like Northeastern weren't playing at their top level, and they were very tilted. It seemed like they were tilted. They were getting caught out literally. I think they got caught out on side lane literally unironically like 15 times throughout the last 2 games of that series combined. And so
Yeah.
to me, it was like there was a chance for one of those teams to come in and show that they completely earned the spot. But now it really still seems really super up in the air with those two teams and Ohio State and Ottawa, a Washington even who didn't even play, and then of course there's the Minnesota and Carleton that I think they're
Yeah.
more closer to being in because of their status in the North and the East conferences, but still not 100% locks in my eyes.
No, there were literally 8 teams in the conversation for those 4 spots, and unfortunately, only 2 of them were able to come to this event, which I do think is a bit disappointing. And it totally is what it is. But I completely agree with you. Like, nobody locked up a ticket in the last few weeks of the season, which we were really hoping would happen. But it's kind of how it is.
It's gonna be a lot of chaos when those votes come out. Unfortunately,
the water ended up getting very muddy at the end of the season. But at the end of the day, votes have to be cast. And teams have to make it. Teams have to earn it. But Grapes, let's talk about the teams that most certainly earned it. The ones playing in the conference finals, in the regionals over the weekend.
Yes, sir. We had a bunch of conference champions be crowned. I think 6 in total. The MEC, NECC, and then the 4 regional conferences. The big winners, all across the board, were UST and UCI, who obviously just kind of took care of business as anticipated. But I want to focus in on these 4 series in particular, as they maybe had the more interesting storylines. Which one is more interesting to you? ISU taking another game off of Maryville and continuing to be the only team that has done so, both in the NACL and in CLOL this season.
Literally in the entire 2025 calendar year, yeah.
Ole Miss wiping the floor with number 3 ranked Fisher in the NACC finals. Grandview winning a dominant 3-1 over Purdue Northwest when in theory we thought that these two teams were going to be very closely contested. That also included a 2-win for Grandview in the upper finals earlier on in the weekend at the MEC LAN. And finally, in the Eastern Conference, which was also streamed right here on Salty Runback, St. Clair demolishing University of Western Ontario 3-0, with none of those games looking particularly close.
Dude, it was a lot of not very close conference finals. We only had 2 games get taken by other teams. I'm going to power rank them in order of importance, okay? I think the most important one to me is Ole Miss versus Fisher, where this is a massive statement win from Ole Miss, I think, like the like we're back kind of thing. I think it absolutely proved that they were kind of having a down week just a couple weeks ago, and I think they've put the top dogs on notice. I know like a month ago we had a conversation about like, is Ole Miss a top contender? I think now we can probably say yes again. Also, we had the conversation of like, is Fisher, locked into a top 4 spot? Probably, but if they do lose really badly to Ole Miss, it'll get called into question. But that probably won't happen. and then it happened.
Yeah.
And so that became a conversation. I think that's the most important one for me because it just is it's a battle of 2 top 5 schools, right? And that's always going to be like at the top. I think after that, I have probably Maryville, ISU. It is the second time that Maryville has dropped the game in the calendar year 2025. It has happened to the same team. ISU looked pretty good, which is really good for them. They're kind of on a bit of a skid for like the last month or so up until their UHSP series last week. The Grandview one, big statement from them. I think it probably buys Grandview a top 10 spot going into the tournament, which is great for them. They've really scaled into the year. I don't really care too much about St. Clair Western because I think it's the result that we expected, and it kind of just like happened. And it's like that series.
Was it though?
That series, okay. A series could have been a 3-0 or a 3-2, but when it looked the way that it did, I feel the same about it. You know what I mean? Like
It was a 5-game series when they played in the upper finals. It was a very close back and forth, at least in terms of
right, and then now it
scoring.
was just a very close back and forth.
This was not back and forth. This was
okay.
St. Clair domination. So
Sure.
to me, it's the fact that it's such a stark contrast in the East was a little bit surprising, but also I think it was a bit of a long time coming here for Western Ontario because when you look at like the way that they play and you look at their match histories, they seem very focused on very specific champions. You need Jin. You need either Jin, Aurelion Sol, or Smolder for Julian. You need Rumble for Dr. Calculus. You need a Rakan for Lynx. You need Victor for Left Stick Candy. If you don't get like those specific champions and have everything go right for you like in sequence during a game, Western just look completely lost. And that's exactly what St. Clair and honestly a team like UTM were able to exploit last week when they played against them, taking them all the way to 5 games. And even though Western had this very strong start to the season, it seems like their style is starting to get figured out a little bit. And I think St. Clair were able to take advantage of that really, really well. I will say, it doesn't put like I still don't think St. Clair like they played okay, but they still were making like horrible catch out mistakes like they were earlier in the year. They have not cleaned up any of that level of play. But the fact that they had such a clear strategy, and also the fact that Lig and Flocon just had great series against UWO, and who have their mid 80 carries probably the two weaker players on their team, it just allowed for that to happen. And so that was pretty surprising for me. But
That's fair.
it is what it is.
Yeah,
And now
that's
I'm a
fair.
little bit worried about what Western actually will look like. We'll get into that maybe a bit later, but
I
to
mean, this is how I
me,
feel about Western every year for like the last 3 or 4 years when they've gotten to
but we
CLOL,
were
where it's
hype
like,
on them going in. Like going into the upper finals, I think all of us would have picked Western to beat St. Clair. Are we wrong? In terms of the rankings, Western was ahead of St. Clair
I don't
for
know.
a
Like,
number
okay,
of weeks at that
I
point.
like kind of agree with you because yes, most of us did have Western rated above St. Clair, mostly because Western beat St. Clair earlier in the season. But I don't know. Like I don't think it was like that clear cut though. Like I think most people would have still had him on even footing. Like we always thought Western was good, but
But we all
it
thought that
still
they were the
always felt like
better.
this like lukewarm, like it's Western. You know what I mean?
I had empowering ahead of St. Clair going into that upper finals, and I think most of the people that were following did as well. And so the fact that
I
it
think
shifted,
because
I
I think
think
I
the
had
downfall of
moved.
Western
I think
like
I
kind
had
of
moved St. Clair
is
ahead
the
of them
story.
actually about like a week or two before because of the Nace win St. Clair was picking up over cats like ISU, which to me started to bump up their stock a little bit. I don't know if now we could debate whether or not that's ethical, but I do think like there was like a week where I had like St. Clair 6, Western 7, ISU 8 or something. Like it was like the week before the upper final. I could be wrong. I mean, I think my point is I had them very close. Like I never had Western
Oh no, they were
clearly
close, but we had
favored.
Western I think lean tilted ahead.
Sure,
And
sure,
now
sure, sure,
now
sure.
it's clearly
Yeah, okay,
St. Clair ahead of Western
I got you there.
after this week.
I mean St. Clair definitely ahead of Western. Like Western probably played themselves out of a 2 seed at the tournament with their 0-3. And by that standpoint, I definitely agree with you because I think St. Clair has it locked up. Like they're going to be somewhere between 6 and 8 for everybody on the committee, right? But Western is probably now like number 10.
In a similar vein to that, a lot of people had Purdue Northwest ahead of Grandview going into the MEC LAN as well. Now I
Ball
didn't.
knowers knew this was coming.
I had Grandview ahead for the last like few weeks. Ever since they beat them in the regular season, even though Purdue Northwest had the better overall record. And Grandview ended up taking care of business again. Combined 5-1 against PNW across 2 days of LAN competition. That is definitely a good huge statement win for GVU, who I know I know you've been talking about it, Hawk, but their resume now looks very, very good. Wins against a lot of good teams. I think I agree with you that they deserve a spot there in that top 10.
Yeah. Dude, Grandview, lot of losses, especially earlier in the season before they had Nightstar, but they also have the most Q1 wins, tied with Maryville. They 12 Q1 wins apiece, and they have a top 10 win over ISU. Like this team is definitely really good. They're definitely scaling into the season. I think to me, like it's not necessarily surprising that they took a 3-1, but it's like that's a great way to just like finish strong and probably get into the top 8 or at least be like right on that cusp.
Yeah, top 10 for sure, I would say. And the question is like how far up ahead of teams like UCI and Western and St. Clair that you wanna really take them. ISU though, again, being the
We
only
argued about this
team
earlier.
being the only team to take a game off of Maryville and I think that has to me that says something. I know that some people, like, if I was power ranking these teams now, like, and not taking like previous experience and results into account, that puts ISU like very, very high for me. Because it wasn't just the one win that they had. The other games were also very competitive, and the early game specifically, like Music and Meslo, were able to actually work really well together as a 2v2. Fatakan, honestly, like, might have had the better series against Sajed for the entirety of the 4 games, like if you just look at it individually speaking. And so to me, the fact that ISU has been able to match up against Maryville and none of the other teams really have either gotten the opportunity to or have been able to, that speaks of volumes to me, and I think that could result in them actually, despite it being a 3-1 loss for them in the finals, that combined with their 3-0 over UHSP, I think actually does help them out a lot in terms of where they're placed.
It was definitely surprising considering how badly they lost to Maryville 2 weeks ago.
It was surprising, but the fact it was a bad loss, obviously,
Look,
that they lost there to Maryville.
Undoubtedly, we know that ISU has the capability to be a great team. Music is one of the best players in all of CLOL. I think pretty much everyone would agree with that. And they have a good team, but their resume sucks. They're 0-6 against top 10 teams. Granted, 4 of those losses are against Maryville, but they also dropped 1 to GVU. So a lot of like losses at the Q1 level, no marquee wins on their entire season, and we're literally just talking about singular game wins against Maryville. On the season, I want to say they are They're 2-10 against Maryville in games across the entire season. So, like, yes, they took 2 games, but they also got 12 chances. And I'm sure teams like St. Clair and Winthrop and UCI would kill for 12 chances against Maryville to take 2 games and get gassed up for it as well. Like, and I don't want that to take away from the fact that ISU is a good team. They're definitely still a top 8 team. I think that was kind of getting called into question, to be completely honest, towards the end of the season.
If they got smacked by MU, for sure, top 8 would have been in question.
Like, they locked it up and they turned it around in the last 2 weeks of the season to like secure themselves a probable, at least in my eyes, 7th seed heading into the tournament, which is good.
To me,
and it showed their peak. But I'm just like I hesitate to rate ISU higher than any other teams because they did well against MU, just because ISU is the only team that gets to play MU 12 times. So you can't ignore everything else that happened this season because ISU got 12 chances to take 2 games off of MU. You know, I
just see very, very little chance of anybody else in that tier that you were talking about, even if they got 100 chances to take a single game off of Maryville.
That's so crazy. You don't think St. Clair, if they got 12 chances, would take 1 game off of Maryville?
I would bet against it.
We need to start doing like these fucking Grapes. You follow chess at all?
Kind of, a little bit.
Okay, like we need to start doing like these like Clash of Claims type shit, where like the people like it's like someone shit talks somebody else on Twitter, and they set up an entire tournament where these 2 chess players will play against each other, like 30 games in a weekend to figure out who's the better.
I would watch
player.
St. Clair.
Well, like we get sick
for a while.
St. Clair gets 12 chances to beat Maryville.
I don't know. I think ISU much higher ceiling than the other teams in there, and to
I'm
me,
willing to agree with that. I'm willing to agree with that.
And the fact that to me, those wins against Maryville, competitive losses to Maryville even, show that think about this. Winthrop in the NACE Super Conference against Maryville. Again, I don't love using NACE as like a be-all end-all, but sometimes it's necessary. Maryville's roster for that series was Zamudo, Shimmer, Spyrax, UG playing 80 fucking carry, and Zyko. And guess what? They won both of those games in under 25 minutes against Winthrop.
I know. Yeah, I mean, Maryville's filthy. We get it.
So compare that to what ISU at a potential ceiling that we've seen from them so far against MU. The fact that they won those 2 games is like.
But ISU
if you're looking
lost to Maryville and lost to St. Clair and lost to Grandview. I'm just like, oh, like ISU. Is so inconsistent. I agree. Like their ceiling is higher. Their ceiling is higher.
They also dominated the ACL. they were undefeated in their ACL season. They did well in the fall lands. They have the best player out of any team outside of the top
California
5.
State University Northridge also did well in the fall. We can't go back to fall. It doesn't work.
ACL is so different than warm up. We cannot be making that comparison right now. ISU like got wins. I forgot who exactly. I think they got wins like over a Pulse squad, like the Pulse teams. One of the Pulse teams. They they beat them in a best of 3.
Dude, I don't know. I don't remember ACL 2024 summer.
When this roster's at their peak, and we've
Weren't
seen
they
them
still
at
playing with Cross and ACL? Am I crazy?
no, music was
Music
announced
there?
like in the fall. I'm like 90% sure. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe if I'm
I
wrong,
feel like
then
that was like
we throw
like
that
an
out.
old ISU, like some dozer roster. I could be totally wrong. I don't
Either
care
way.
about fall. I don't give a fuck about fall.
ISU
Fall
has
is a whole
they have the
different
highest
season.
ceiling. They have the highest ceiling. I think, resume wise, sure, like head to head. Do we want to count this like these super conference games where we have some insider information? ISU like wasn't at their 100% A game due to breaks and player availability and things like that for those matches. Or do we see what they look like against the top opponents? And for
Hey,
me,
wait a minute. Let's not all of a sudden start making excuses for ISU and Super Conference, though. TJ literally said to us in CLOL Hub after they lost to Grandview, we're like, TJ, what happened? Like, were you playing with subs? Was it spring break? And he was like, no, it was the full team. Like, he
also
owned
said the
it.
full
So let's
team-
not
the full team-
let's not completely downplay
wanna-
those games.
they said the full team woke up 5 minutes after the series is supposed to start. So that was also part of the argument. Again, it's all
Sure.
conjecture.
All right.
We can't fully trust that.
I need everyone to understand. Grapes and I argued about this for like a literal hour in the CLOL Discord, the committee Discord before this. So we had to hash it out here on Salty Runback.
We're doing this. Winthrop does the whole conversation of Winthrop getting of Fisher getting smashed, meaning Winthrop goes higher than that.
Grapes, don't put me on the spot like this. I was really hoping I could fly another radar with my take here.
Because if we're saying the tape and the games and the results and the match history values St. Clair ahead of ISU, then we both have to have Fisher ahead of Winthrop. And spoilers, neither of us do.
Wow, you're really just gonna put me on blast like that. Look, here's the problem: is I've watched every single game that like Fisher and Winthrop have played that is of consequence in their entire season, and I can say that I believe that Winthrop is the better team. I actually think Fisher has a lot of talent on their team, but I think they just rely on that talent too much. Fisher's top side is fantastic, but their macro is not very good, unfortunately. They just rely on kind of being better players in certain roles. And I think Winthrop also has a lot of talent in guys like Mobility and Denethor. And right now they look like they're really struggling to know how to play the game as a team, but they are generally better as 5 than Fisher. So
I don't know.
Yeah,
It sounds like the argument that I'm putting out there. It sounds like the argument I'm putting out there.
I'm using direct comparisons right now. I'm not talking about Winthrop looked better against this secret third team. I'm saying that looking at the two teams in direct comparison with each other,
In direct
I think
comparison,
that
the
Winthrop
only
is better
result
than
that
Fisher.
the only result we have is Fisher beating Winthrop in the regular
and Fisher
season.
didn't get to play each other in a best of 5. The only series that they have against each other is fucking like their resumes are the same.
In the best of 3,
I'm pulling up my
which
sheet
is the
right
same
now.
comparison between St. Clair and ISU.
I'm pulling
Best
up
of 3.
I'm
That's the
pulling
only
up my
games that we've
sheet
seen
right
them
now.
play against each
I'm
other.
pulling up my
So,
sheet right now. Okay?
I'm saying
because
that you either have to have both Illinois
no,
State
you don't.
ahead
because
of St.
I
Clair.
have seen less tape of St. Clair and ISU, and I think the teams are the same. Like to me, St. Clair, ISU, I don't give a fuck. They're the same team. They're in the same tier, and they can both be rated right next to each other. I'm just breaking the tie with resume, right? Like I've seen enough tape of both of them to think that they both kind of suck, and that if music doesn't get ahead, ISU loses.
So that's the difference. That's the difference in our take. Then is because you think that St. Clair and ISU are the same, and you're valuing the tiebreaker based off of resume versus Fisher versus Winthrop. Versus Fisher versus Winthrop, you're analyzing the game. You're seeing differences. I mean, we could get into the specific head-to-head with St. Clair and ISU if we wanted right now. I mean, we could go head-to-head, but I think just real quick, TLDR, the fact that they have their best player, ISU have the best player on that team. The best player for St. Clair is matched very, very closely, if not having a better player at the AD carry position. I think Lig and Vatican basically cancel each other out. And so having music be the difference maker there, and I think the rest of the board is relatively even. You could give a slight edge to Flocon maybe and a slight edge to PCL. That to
Before
me is a head-to-head better team for ISU.
Sure. I think at the end of the day, because now I'm going to argue about Winthrop and Fisher, because at
We're
the end of the
arguing
day,
over, by the way,
I
one
think
difference in the
St. Clair and
standings between each
ISU
other,
are
so.
close enough to where like I just don't care enough. But what I'm about to talk about is that Winthrop and Fisher have like identical resumes. Other than that, Fisher got second in NECC and Winthrop got third, which is obviously fairly direct, right? And for the record, I think it's completely valid to say, hey, Fisher got second in NECC. They're the number 4 team. I think that's like totally fine. I do not hold that against anyone. But St. Clair and ISU do not have the same resume, right? Like you are willfully ignoring resume when looking at St. Clair and ISU. But let's talk about Winthrop and Fisher, because against Q1 as a whole, Winthrop is 8-4, Fisher is 6-3. Okay? Winthrop against top 10 is 4-4, so all 4 of their losses are against other top 10 schools, whereas Fisher is 5-2. So what Fisher has, as opposed to Winthrop, is a win over Winthrop, obviously 2-0, which is very substantial. A more recent win over Ole Miss that was very contentious, and they have a loss to non-top 10 South Florida from Playfly, which you can care about that as much or as little as you want. Winthrop has a loss to Maryville, as well as 2 losses to Ole Miss that are more recent, and then the loss to Fisher earlier on in their season. But outside of that, they have wins over St. Clair, Grandview, ISU, all these teams that we're kind of arguing about right now. So, in my opinion, Winthrop's resume is actually slightly better than Fisher's. I also, by eye test, think that Winthrop is like maybe 5% better than Fisher. Like the tiniest little interval. I think the teams are really close. And then Fisher just happened to beat the Icelandic Ole Miss team on the day to make second place in NECC and then get destroyed, as opposed to Winthrop that played like same game score against Ole Miss over 2 series as Fisher did, right? But both of them were against the Kiel version of Ole Miss, and we didn't get to see these 2 teams play each other directly. So I think it is completely fair if you want to say Fisher got second in NECC, so they're the 4 seed, or do what I'm doing and say, hey, Winthrop might actually be slightly better based on resume and eye test. I think that's where I'm coming from here.
I think the eye test for me screams ISU. And that's why, like,
All
to
right.
me, it's like it's a substantial
But the
difference
resume's
based
so
off
much
of the
worse,
play.
and it's fine.
The resume's
It's
worse,
fine.
absolutely,
It's
100% the resume's worse. If we're going purely off of record, we wouldn't have a committee. We just have like a standings bot go through everything, right, and then calculate it based off of some mathematical formula. So there's some level of nuance that has to go into this as well. I think I've realized why you have this opinion and I have this, and I have my opinion, is that I just think that difference between ISU and St. Clair in terms of gameplay and an eye test is bigger than you think it is. Because to me, ISU's like series against Maryville and the way they played that separated them to be closer and into that pack of the Winthrops, Ole Misses,
But that's
Fishers,
taking
and UST.
ISU at like their absolute best, and you're not doing that for St. Clair.
At what's St. Clair at their absolute best? Beating ISU, right? Like is that like maybe did they take a game off of a Winthrop or something? They finished top 8 in
Yeah,
the
they took a
OQs.
game off of Winthrop. They beat ISU. Like I'm just like right.
I think that's St. Clair's peak, and then but ISU's peak is taking 2 games off of Maryville, and so
Okay, it's fine.
We've talked about this long enough. We're not
We've
gonna
literally
agree.
been on this headline for like 20 minutes.
It's about the difference between literally the 6th and 7th best team. Almost zero impact on what the bracket looks like.
I really hope this
So-
one was good for the people at home, because Grapes, I thoroughly enjoyed arguing about nothing with you.
We don't disagree enough.
I need the
on this
people to
show.
know my girlfriend is
So-
literally waiting outside, by the way. So I've just
Let's wrap this up
argued
then.
for 20 minutes.
Let's wrap this up then quickly with our Patreon headline. Let's get this episode under an hour.
Yeah.
With a Patreon headline from Collamer, the head coach of Ole Miss, by the way, who asks about the CLOL bracket to pick one team from the top 16 who would inherently get an upper bracket start to go 0-2 and out immediately, and to pick one team from the bottom 16, that's any team that's not currently in the top 16 according to CLOL Hub, to go the furthest in the bracket. So
Yeah.
you can go first.
We
with
don't
both of your picks.
we don't exactly know the bracket right now, but we'll use the CLO Hub one. It'll probably be pretty close, based on conversations. I voted actually the same as the CLO Hub one personally. So just a different order, but okay. Top 16 team that's gonna bomb out. Dude, is it meta to say one of the East teams now and like totally backtrack everything I just
I was gonna say Western.
all right, I'll pick somebody else. Give me fuck. I need to like give me Weber. They do feel like the weakest of like those automatic
That's the most
upper.
boring answer you could have
Okay.
given.
They're not going to be 60. SCAD. Give me SCAD. It's SCAD. SCAD has played nobody good all year except for St. Thomas, who's destroyed them every time.
And USF. They beat USF 3-1.
And South Florida. They're going to, like, all of a sudden get into the heat of the national championship for the first time in school history, and they're not going to be able to take it. So, yeah, give me SCAD.
All right, give me Western. I was talking about it a little bit earlier. Very exploitable play style, I think. And just the way that their season kind of ended, which was almost losing to UTM and then getting blasted by St. Clair in a series that, again, eye test wise, didn't think St. Clair looked that good, other than Lig kind of just being him. I'm not super high on what I'm expecting from Western. Again, they probably jump out of that Group 2, which means they play probably a Group 2 team in the first round, and then down in the lower bracket, there are definitely teams like that can maybe pack a punch. So even though they're going to be higher than like the 15-16 range, that's my pick for a team that could bomb out quickly. Who's your Cinderella run, Hawk?
Dude, I'm going to take the boring answer here. It is South Florida to me, even though they're almost certainly the 17th seed. Dude, South Florida is like, they on one day, they're fucking Superman, and then on the next day, they're Clark Kent, and I can't wait to see how it comes together in the national championship.
That's a very fair answer, especially if you're looking at the previous results and things like that. Being able to take games off of Fisher, beat UTM in a series, take games off of SCAD, and be competitive against the top of the table is something that USF has been able to do maybe better than other teams, but they've also had some losses that they might not have liked, like to OC and to UT Dallas. Give me Ball State from the ESC.
Ooh.
I think I've been more excited about them ever since they completely dismantled Northeastern in the ESC finals, as well as, of course, watching Northeastern play in the Battle of the Bubble. I think that Ball State is in a very similar situation, potentially to a San Jose State, where we kind of have them at the bottom of this like general pack of 20 that we consider to be like decent teams. But they could be way better. It's just we haven't seen them play any other competition. And so I'm going to bank on that upside being the case and have Ball State potentially going on a bit of a Cinderella run. Because if a Ball State runs into a UTM or a Purdue Northwest, it's not necessarily cut and dry for me. I think that could definitely be a series that the Cardinals end up winning.
Yeah, that's a fair take. I like it.
I want to
Guys.
shout out Stony Brook too, but to me, they are a little bit more on like that one-dimensional play style type of thing. So I'm less sold on them. Although they're my boys from the Eastern Conference as well. I want them to do well.
Yeah. Okay, guys. CLOL is gonna be lit. I gotta go. But thanks everyone for watching. Let's keep it under an hour. Check us out on Salty Rub at Salty Runback NA. No, Grapes and I are not getting divorced after the argument we just had. And join the Discord. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. Grapes, anything to say to the people before we send it off?
Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We're gonna have our bracket reveal or bracket predictions out on Wednesday. Or
You're not
Thursday,
gonna want to miss
so
the brackets.
It'll be fun. We'll have some of our sleeper picks and our Cinderella runs in there as well.
Yep. All right. And if you think that Fisher College should be rated ahead of Winthrop, you can take what we said with a grain of salt. I can't wait to hear more about that one. I've been Hawk. That's been Grapes. Oh, check us out at Hawkcast. That's Speedy Grapes as well. I forgot to mention that. Have a great night, everyone.